Here's our note ready and sing. Do you hear, oh my friend, in the play? Oh, I forgot to say hymn number 112. Do you hear? Here we go. Do you hear, oh my friend, in the place where you stand, through the sky, through the land? Do you hear, in the heights on the plain, in the vale, on the main, in the sun, in the rain? Do you hear? Through the roar, through the rush, through the throng, through the crush, do you hear in the hush of your soul, hear the cry if you won't still, hear the heart's call to will, in the sigh's startling trill, in your soul, from the place where you stand to the outermost strand. Do you hear, oh my friend? Do you hear, all the dreams, all the dares, all the sighs, all the prayers? They are yours, mine and theirs. Do you hear, do you hear?
Good morning. My name is Rick Cousins. I am the newest member of the Sunday Services Committee. I'd like to welcome you to our online service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Danbury. We're very glad that you were able to join us this morning and in community to ensure that social distancing does not mean social disengagement. Our weekly services are more than just a gathering of our physical bodies. It is the forming of a sacred time that we make together. Whether you are well-versed in the technology of teleconferencing or this is your first venture, we welcome you. For those of you new among us or are reconnecting with fonder hearts, we invite you to introduce yourselves and where you are, connecting from the chat box as you are comfortable. Whatever the faith and traditions of your past, whatever your theological stance, whatever your heritage, whoever you are and whomever you love, we welcome you. You can learn more about us on our website and our Facebook page. We encourage you to share our Facebook page and reach out to others who might be isolated in this time and might benefit from the spiritual connection with our loving community. I'd like to tell you that we have now added Zoom captioning to our weekly meeting. At the bottom of your screen, there is a button that says CC Live Transcript, and click Enable Auto Transcription to be able to see real-time audio captioning. I'd like to tell you about the young adults of the UCD. Sequoia Lowe is in charge of this group and would like to invite you to join in Conversation, Spirituality, and Social Action every Sunday at noon, the UCD Zoom room. Typically, it's for ages 18 to 25, but all are welcome. Please reach out to Sequoia at the above email address if you would like to participate. Today, we welcome Reverend Kimberly Debus, our service presenter, and she is currently located in Sierra Springs, where she does inspirational and artful and art-filled faith. She consults with congregations and religious professionals, provides sabbatical ministry support throughout the denomination, and has recently served in the Church of the Larger Fellowship, as well as congregations in Long Island and Key West, Florida. Reverend Kimberly?
Yes. Thank you. Our opening words are from the Reverend Renee Rahutsky. In a UU sanctuary, people sing together. Our first breath is followed by our first song, lusty, loud, and primal, a solo that announces to the world, I have arrived. We are the music. As toddlers hearing our first reggae beat, we let our spines and hips bend and sway in response, as natural as the beats of our hearts. We are the music. The drone of the bass notes of the church organ, a vibration in our chest, tense muscles relax, the breath deepens. We are the music. As we push the air from our bellies out through our chest and throat, our changing expressions shape the sound. We are the music. As we sing together, voices blend to create harmony, each voice enriched by its connection to the next. We are the music. So come, despite technology when we cannot hear each other, let us still be the music. Come, let us worship together.
We will now light our chalices. If you have a chalice or candle to light, I invite you to do so safely now, and then we will join together in our chalice lighting affirmation. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and justice is its light. This is our covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek and speak the truth in love, to help one another and celebrate life. If there are children and youth who are in the room but not near the screen, I encourage you to come over now. And together we can join our voices for our children's affirmation. We are Unitarian Universalists. We are people with open minds, loving hearts, and helping hands.
Our Time for All Ages today is a special story put together for you. It's a bit of a history lesson, but with a musical twist. And I promise it's not boring. Way up in Northern Europe, wedged between Finland and Russia, there is a small country called Estonia. Now, there are only about 1 million people in Estonia. It is tiny, but it's also a beautiful country with lots of seaports and tons of rich rolling farmland. Maybe the first thing I learned about Estonians is how much they love music. It has been central to Estonian culture for centuries. And although Estonia is one of the smallest countries in the world, it nonetheless has one of the largest collections of folk songs. Estonians have historically used music to build their culture and community, but also as a political weapon. It is said that song was used in protest of the German invaders of the 13th century, and also in resistance to Russian occupation under Peter the Great in the 18th century. In 1869, Estonians started a song festival tradition called Laulupidu, where choirs from around the country come together every year to sing for days. Right now, nearly 30,000 people sing on stage at the same time. and over 100,000 people come every year to listen. Now, this continued even in times of war. During World War II, Estonia was occupied by the Nazis and then by the Soviets. Now, the Soviet Union was a group of 15 countries that were taken over by Russia to form what they thought of as a communist utopia, the USSR. Countries didn't go willingly, and those who spoke out against the Soviet Union were often banished to work camps or killed. Everyone had to speak in support of the Soviet Union. There was no such thing as free speech. And one of the things about the Soviets is that they understood that in order to build this union, everyone had to be on the same page culturally. So they wanted everyone to be Russian. And so all of the music was Russian, the official language was Russian, the food was Russian, school was all about Russia, and even new citizens were brought into these countries from Russia. Pretty much anything that was Estonian was removed and replaced with Russian things. Everything, even the music in Estonia, was Russian. Now, when it came to the song festival, all of the songs had to be in Russian and be in support of the Soviet Union. We might call this propaganda. And despite having people making sure everything was about Russia, in 1947, they let in a composition called Muisama on Minuarm, or Land of My Fathers, Land That I Love. Now, this was something special because the song was Estonian, was composed by Gustav Ernesaks, and it used a famous Estonian poem by Lydia Koidula. The song slipped by the Soviet censors, and after 2 days of singing compulsory Russian songs glorifying Marx, Lenin, and Stalin, Estonians all sang Muisama on Minuarm in their native tongue, with a common and unspoken knowledge that it expressed hope for a free Estonia. And while the song was forbidden for a few years, they started slipping it in again, here and there. And on the 100th anniversary of the festival, everyone started singing it loudly. The choirs, the audience. The Soviets ordered a military band to play and drown out the singers. But 100 instruments is no match for over 100,000 people singing. The song was sung repeatedly in the face of these authorities, and there was nothing the Soviets could do but eventually invite the composer on stage to conduct the choir for yet another encore, and then pretend they intended to allow this all along. Muisama on Minuarm was never forbidden again. It gave people hope. They weren't sure they could be free, but maybe life could be a little better if they could remember who they were. Estonian, not Russian. In the early 1980s, when the Soviet Union was showing signs of crumbling, the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev put in some laws in place that allowed a bit more freedom, especially freedom of speech. But you know what happens when you give people freedom of speech? They use it. Soon people were speaking out, and more people were realizing they could be free, they could be liberated. They remembered they are Estonian first. They kept singing Muisama and other songs about being Estonian. And they kept talking. When Soviet troops would threaten violence, which they did, a lot. Estonians would gather to face the soldiers, and they would sing. And the soldiers would turn away and blood would not be shed. In 1988, activist and artist Heinz Valk noticed this and coined the term singing revolution. He wrote, "We started a revolution with a smile and a song." And while it was hard, and the story really too complex for this short telling, eventually the Estonians were successful. And Estonia was the first of those 15 countries to declare its own independence. Singing their songs was the fuel for change. This was their power. This was something they shared from heart to heart, from family to family, from community to community. They have their liberation because of their singing. This non-violent way to assert who they were and claim their identity, their inherent worth, and their dignity. Muisama is now one of their favorite national songs, and it is sung every year at Laulupidu.
Now we prepare this time and space for those who are so moved to share their individual joys and sorrows in community. You're invited to share in the chat what burdens your spirit and or lifts it up this morning. We come to the time for our congregational offering. If you're with us for the first time, feel free to pass the virtual plate. Your presence here in the Zoom room is your gift to us. Members, please click the link on your screen in the chat to make a donation or pledge. For even though we are not in our beloved fellowship hall, our operating expenses are still the same. You may also mail a check to UCD at 24 Clappard Ridge Road in Danbury. Thank you for doing your part to support and sustain this community we love. Now please join me in our congregational response. In the spirit of compassion and service, we dedicate these, our offerings.
The revolution in Estonia was many things. Born from decades of Soviet rule and before that Nazi occupation, and truly a centuries old history of conquest. The revolution in the late 1980s was about reclaiming first and foremost their identity and their worth, their freedom from occupying forces, but more, their liberation from oppression. It is, as we heard in the story, best understood in terms of their music. Music, their Estonian songs were the fuel that drove them to revolution. But let me be clear, the revolution in Estonia was not fueled by a bunch of new songs, even if new songs cropped up. The revolution was fueled by hearing their old songs in a new way. For Estonia, Muisamaa and their thousands of folk songs were part of their cultural imaginary. Now, as I understand it, the cultural imaginary or social imaginary is a collection of stories and symbols and ideas that surround a people's concept of themselves and their particular identity. Cultural imaginaries aren't false, rather, they inform how a people understand their collective identity. And this is a remarkably common practice. We see cultural imaginaries built all over, particularly in Latino communities, LGBTQ communities, immigrant and refugee communities. It's the symbols and stories and mythos of our people, and even music and literature and dances and food and media that create the container that is the cultural imaginary. So as we can see from our story about the Estonian singing revolution, setting the Koidula poem in an inspiring choral composition reminded the people of the things that made them Estonian. And the song became embedded as a symbol of their cultural imaginary, which then helped them claim not only their cultural identity, but their very liberation. We Unitarian Universalists have our own cultural imaginary, built on the stories of John Murray and the shipwreck that led to the first Universalist sermon in America, or the story of Henry David Thoreau and his 2 years in a cabin on Walden Pond, stories of real people who tell us who we are, simplified into legends that are a little light on facts. In religious movements, the cultural imaginary is built on story, sacred text, ritual, practice, and song. For modern Unitarian Universalists, our cultural imaginary is grounded in the song Spirit of Life, which, by the way, took a bit longer to become our song than common practice would suggest. But indeed it has, and the song has become part of our identity, a shibboleth or a symbol, if you will, to affirm our belonging to this faith's cultural imaginary. But it's important, these songs we sing. They tell us who we are and what we believe. It is said that people don't so much speak their theology as sing their theology. And we certainly sing ours in books collected 15 and 27 years ago. Now here's the thing. As Unitarian theologian James Luther Adam asserts, if revelation is not sealed and there's always more for us to learn, know, and experience, then what does it mean that we're getting stuck in music that is decades old? Is our theology stuck in 2005 or 1993? Well, we know that's not true. At the 2020 General Assembly, the Commission on Institutional Change published their report, Widening the Circle of Concern, in which they call for a shift in our collective theologies to liberation. Namely, what does it mean to view how we are Unitarian Universalist and how we understand our principles and sources when we consider not just freedom from constraints and our fairly common reliance on self-reliance, but shift to considering those both in and outside our congregations and their collective liberation from poverty, bigotry, and oppression. When we change our view from how am I free from constraint to how are we liberated from oppression, we understand the power of Unitarian Universalism to be about the tide raising all boats, to help create a world where all of us are truly free, to actually build the beloved community and not just talk about it. When we change our viewpoint, when we shift that lens, we understand the power of Unitarian Universalism to affirm that none of us are free until all of us are free. That is liberation. And while there are songs in our hymnal, in our cultural imaginary, that are marked freedom, and while none of them are tagged liberation, we know that even in an established cultural imaginary, art changes when we are not looking at it. And so when we look again at some of our songs, we see the liberation in there just begging us to lean into it. We look at a song like Circle Round for Freedom, which was written by cantor Linda Hirschhorn, and suddenly we can see the collective liberation in it. Circle round for freedom, circle round for peace, for all of us imprisoned, circle for release, circle for the planet, circle for each soul, for the children of our children. Keep the circle whole. And even a song that uses I language, like Oh Freedom, which is a folk song from the post-emancipation American South. Suddenly, these songs aren't just about me, one person, but are about everyone, praying for release from oppression. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'd be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my God and be free. And so this work isn't just about freedom songs. So many of our hymns speak to this call to liberation of all. So many. Wake now my senses and hear the earth call, right? And one more step, we will take one more step. And many more. All of these hymns calling us to this work of liberating all. And now, this isn't to say that every one of our hymns can or should be seen now through a liberative lens. Some of them are just about nature or Christmas. They do have other topics, but there are so many. There are also some that have some problems. And just because we're shifting the lens doesn't mean they're all fine now. Some of our hymns show us the evidence of how the moral arc of the universe has been bending, even in the last 30 years. I first realized this when I took up a spiritual practice of singing our hymns, one a day, both books. Soon I was researching the hymns' origins, the histories, learning more about usage, their composers, exploring the theologies. And over again, I kept bumping up on phrases like brothers and sisters and dark and light, and words like stand and run and walk, and themes about conquest and empire. And it's not surprising. Remember that the Gray Hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition, was first commissioned before the end of the Cold War and was only published in 1993. The members of that hymnal commission were told to approach expansively. And for them, it meant theologies, more humanism, more of the new Earth Center traditions, and remember, they'd only recently gotten the sixth source and the seventh principle. It meant changing God language to be more inclusive and to include women. And they were at the end of this Cold War, the end of apartheid, the end of nuclear proliferation. And we had just been at war in the Gulf. So what was on our minds and the minds of our hymnal commission was peace and freedom, which you see over and over in our hymns. By the early 2000s, when the Teal hymnal Singing the Journey was published, you'd think things would have shifted. But again, we were at war again in the Gulf. So what was on our mind was peace and freedom. But since then, in 15 short years, we have bent the moral arc toward justice a bit more, have drawn the circle of love a bit wider. We learned about the gender spectrum, the doctrine of discovery, the harm of ableism, the cost of poverty, critical race theory, intersectionality, and with it we have learned of the power of language to change the world and our minds and hearts. And so what this means is that there are in our hymnals some difficult language that is difficult to sing in 2020. Art changes when we aren't looking at it, and sometimes it just doesn't age well. For many, the hymn We'll Build a Land is about the beloved community, echoing the quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who quoted the book of Amos in the Hebrew Scriptures. Come to the land where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like water, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. And then the Reverend Danielle DeBona, who is Native American, tells us, yes, you can sing it, but you have to think about me and how my people's lands were stolen in the name of God. So, is it a song of liberation? Can we sing it? Should we sing it? This kind of challenge is the work that we are called to. Looking at our assumptions, our language, our music, all of the elements of our Unitarian Universalist cultural imaginary, and deciding what speaks the Unitarian Universalist language we most need in order to truly love the hell out of this world. It comes down to this. When we talk about widening the circle of concern in our world, in our denomination, in our congregations, and in our personal lives, we already have an amazing tool at our disposal through which we can affirm and promote and grow and change. We have these songs that affirm not just peace and freedom, but songs that affirm liberation, songs that proclaim a call to justice, equity, and compassion, songs that challenge us, songs that inspire us to act, songs that inspire us to reckon with our past and make it better, songs that comfort and feed our souls for the long journey ahead. And yes, there will be new songs. We have already adopted some of them already into our Unitarian Universalist cultural imaginary. You may know, we shall be known by the company we keep. And where you go, I will go, beloved. And the tide is rising, and so are we. But even in our two books, our living tradition, the tradition we hold close to our hearts, we have so much of what we need already to build a new way and draw the circle wide. So let us breathe. Octavia Butler writes that all you touch, you change. All you change changes you, and the only lasting truth is change. Will you pray with me? We all need a prayer for the stuck places in us, in our bodies, our hearts, our minds. We need a prayer for the stuck places in our families, in our world, for all those days when it feels like everything is caught in an endless loop of same and status quo and sterility. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. Those are words from thousands of years ago, the book of Ecclesiastes, but they still ring true. What has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done. Spirit of truth, hear our prayer. Help us get over ourselves. Help us to release the restrictions that fear and grief and white supremacy have kept on our imaginations. Open us to the holy possibilities that are available for us in this moment and every moment. Connect us to the change that is everywhere, the change that is in the dirt, the change that is in the trees, the change that is in the rocks, in the river, the change that is in our language and in our songs. That we barely manage to catch a glimpse is true, but we do. Connect us to our own power, the shifting plates of our hearts, the ancient dust we contain, and shed with each breath, each step, and tend still to the grief of all that has been lost. Tend to our grief and all we keep losing, the unfair choices, the no good options. Give us the courage to wail in anger so we can make space in our lungs for a new song, a lullaby for all that is being born in this great and living darkness. The shadows and surprise and surrender that all that readies in us and in the worthy dream of beloved community. To change, to be changed, to give thanks for this. We sing out praise and gladness for this, that we can wake up to this world again, that we can wake up to its beauty, its possibility. We praise and sing our thanks that we have the strength, and most of all, that we have the company to keep moving forward, eyes open into the dawning day. Blessed be, Ashe, and Amen. And let us sing together our beloved hymn, Spirit of Life.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
We will now extinguish our chalices as we say together our words of affirmation. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and out into the world until we are together again. And now let's join our voices in our closing hymn, number 1017, Building a New Way. Nancy, you're currently muted.
All right, let's start again. I was on mute. Okay, ready and sing with apologies. Here we go. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way, feeling stronger every day. We are building a new way. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. We are working to be free. Hate and greed and jealousy. We are working to be free. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. We can feed our every need. Start with love, that is the seed. Can feed our every need. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Peace and freedom is our cry. Without these, the world will die. Peace and freedom is our cry. Back to the first verse. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are building a new way. We are
In the words of Barbara Pescan, because of those who came before, we are. In spite of their failings, we believe. Because of and in spite of the horizons of their vision, we too dream. Let us go remembering to praise, to live in the moment, to love mightily, to bow to the mystery. Go in love, go in joy, go in peace.
We'll now move into our fellowship time breakout groups. The primary purpose of the breakout groups